In this CBT nugget, we want to take a look at upgrading to Exchange 2013. And if you're kind of thinking to yourself, I'm going to hire in a consultant for this. That's not a bad option. I'm just simply saying, you might want to think this through for a second. I bet you can do this. I bet you if you already have Exchange implemented, Exchange 2007 or 2010, and you wanted to do the actual migration yourself, you could do this. I'm not saying it's not complicated. Well, it's not as hard as you might think it is. In fact, it's pretty straightforward, and there's plenty of resources to help you make sure that you are successful with this. I think you will find that if you try it in a lab environment, you're going to be very successful. So let me show you what we're going to take a look at so that you can get started doing your own upgrade to Exchange 2013. To get started on our excursion of doing our own upgrades to Exchange 2013, the first place we want to stop off is take a look at the terms that we're going to be using. Now, it's not really complicated, not a whole lot of terms or anything, but there are some confusing terms. You'll hear the terms of like migration, transition, upgrade. I just want to kind of clear up what those are and what an upgrade looks like. We also want to take a look at what resources are available to you. I want to get you started with a resource that I always like to use during this process. And we're going to come back to that same resource down here when we want to follow a plan for our upgrade. Also, we want to take a look at what can actually get upgraded in this process. And then, oh yeah, this is going to be kind of fun and interesting. I just love this. It'll take us a little bit, but how do you actually perform the upgrade? This is probably one of the most important pieces. We're going to look at the concept and an overview of what the upgrade process looks like. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, that's cool. Are we going to do one? Well, we're going to do this process and go through this planning of it. And then I think you'll quickly see that doing it is the easy part. Okay. Terms and resources and what can I upgrade. Let's start off with the terms right now. I'm using a term that I'm not comfortable using, and it's the current term out there. The term I'm using right now is, let me grab my pen here. I don't have my pen in my hands, is upgrade. That is what we're doing. We are upgrading to Exchange 2013, and we're going to talk about the versions of previous versions of Exchange that you can do this from, but I want to kind of focus on this word upgrade. Here's what this does not mean, and then this is the most important thing. I don't know if you've been around Exchange for a long time, then you might remember back in the Exchange 5.5, Exchange 2000, Exchange 2003 days, when you had an Exchange box. When we said the word upgrade, what that meant is you walked up to your production level Exchange box, production, you stuck a CD into it, you ran setup, and you performed an upgrade. In other words, you upgraded the software. That's bloody dangerous. That is, oh boy, those are some white knuckle moments when you really are hoping and praying that everything worked out just fine. And if it didn't, you got to test your disaster recovery capabilities. I want to say those were the good old days. Those were not the good old days. So the word upgrade, sends cold shivers up and down my spine when I use it. So we started to change the term because we didn't want to do this anymore. We started to change the term to migration, which is what we do today. And I'm going to show you this process here in a couple minutes of setting up a migration, what that looks like. But in a nutshell, it means this: your production environment will not get affected by your migration to the new environment. In other words, we're going to have two environments. We're going to have your old environment that we're not going to mess with, and then we're going to have the brand new environment that we're going to fully test and check everything out and make sure everything is working, and then bring over like your mailboxes. This is a very safe way to do this. It gives you plenty of opportunity for fully testing everything. So a migration, this is what we've done since Exchange 2003. This is how you got from Exchange 2003 to Exchange 2007. This migration process is excellent. Notice I'm using the word migration. That's actually what we're doing. However, I want to point out that this term for a while was also referred to as transition. Transition. So let me just kind of emphasize this. This old way of doing things, you can't do that anymore. No, it's not possible. We don't do it that way. This is the only way we have available. So whether we're using the word upgrade, which is the current term that we like to use, or if it's the term migration or transition, we mean this. So that's what we're going to do. It's a safe way to do it, and it gives you plenty of opportunity for testing. That's why I really like that. Now, a couple of things here as far as resources go. Let me kind of snap this up here for you real quick. I'm going to bring up my browser. There's a resource that I'm going to come back to towards the end here that I want you to see. And here's how I'm going to find it. I'm going to use the term upgrade to Exchange 2013, and I'm going to take you out. You already see that I already went out there to find it. Now, this is 2010 to 2013. There's 2007 to 2013. We're going to talk about that in a second. But I want to take you out to this because I want to show you what they have here out at TechNet. So here is upgrading to Exchange. What they have, and we're going to kind of go through this in much more detail here towards the end when we start to build a plan. They have what you need to do to upgrade to Exchange. Now, here's the cool part. They list it for you step by step, and they give you links to go to explain it in more detail. But really what I like, and this is what we're going to go through towards the end after we understand everything, is we're going to look, there's a checklist. Now, some of you might be thinking to yourself, well, is this any good? Is it like a good checklist, or are there parts missing? No, this is an excellent checklist. They worked really hard on this. And this is, look at it, step 1, read the release notes. And now don't actually just ignore something here. See how it has a box over here where you can like check it off? You print this out and you check things off. That's exactly what we're going to want to do. So you read the release notes, you go through, you verify your system requirements. If you're not exactly sure what that is, you click on the link over here. So here's the primary resource I want you to kind of keep in mind, and we'll come back to this towards the end as we start to build a plan for putting this all together. And this will give you all of the options that you need for making the upgrade work for you. Now, what can you upgrade to? And that's, oh boy, it's really kind of important. We want to get to Exchange 2013 in a safe and controlled fashion. So here's what you're allowed to have. You can have, I'm drawing it as a box, Exchange 2007. Specifically, if you're on Exchange 2007, you want to be on, let's see, it's SP3, so SP3, and Rollup 10 on that. So that's the update for it. So at least Rollup 10 or better than that. So you can migrate or upgrade from 2007 to 2013. Awesome! You can also, if you have 2010, and this is SP3, you can also migrate, awesome, to 2013. Here's something that a lot of people have found themselves in, and I have a lot of customers, a lot of friends that have found themselves in this situation. They've been kind of like, well, we started this upgrade from 2007 to 2010, but we haven't finished it. We've just, we still got mailboxes and stuff over here, and we still got mailboxes. We got some over there. We just haven't finished everything. We got public folders all over the place. Do we have to actually like finish this to get to 2013? No, you don't. As long as you meet these requirements here. This is a hybrid migration or a hybrid upgrade. You can still go to 2013. You can have mixed versions out there, and we can get everything cleaned up and on to 2013 for making this change. Now, I just want to say that you will hear some notations about what kind of upgrade are you doing. Is it referred to as a, and I'll put down here the word single phase migration, or is it a single phase upgrade, or is it a multi-phase upgrade? So I'll put multi. And here's simply what that means is a single phase migration means that you're going to do this like overnight. In other words, you're going to migrate everything all at once from whatever version you have, and then decommission this older version. So you're going to just do it all at once. There's no need for, let me use the term, ongoing coexistence. Okay, coexistence. That means you have both environments running for a long-term a longer time. I got to be honest with you. I don't like the concept of a single phase upgrade. It's usually used, you'll see people use it for very small companies. In other words, I could go in on a Saturday morning, if it's like a small business, and have them fully migrated to Exchange 2013 in an afternoon. It's a small data size, it's a simple configuration, it's easy enough to do, and boom, they're done. You can do that. However, most of environments, especially the ones that I work with, and I imagine yours too, it's probably more mailboxes and probably a more complicated environment than something you just want to try to pull off in an afternoon. So a multi-phase migration means that what we're going to have is coexistence. In other words, you're going to have this older environment running out there for some period of time. And there's nothing wrong with that. We just have to think of it this way, that we're going to have the old environment, we still have to maintain the old environment, and we're going to have the new environment. And as we're migrating things or upgrading things across, however much time that takes, we just have to maintain both environments. When we're all done, then we'll be able to decommission the old ones. And I'm going to drill in more deeply on how that process occurs here in just a few minutes, but that's really what the concept is of a multi-phase upgrade. Now, you know what? Did you mention this? Did you just mention this? I don't see Exchange 2003 on my little list here. Upgrading 2003 to 2013. So, what about if you have Exchange 2003 and you want to upgrade to 2013? No soup for you. Yeah, no, you can't. Now, let me put it this way. You might be going, well, wait a minute, what am I going to do? It's actually not that bad, although it's going to sound horrifying. Here's the deal. There is no direct upgrade to Exchange 2013. That's what happens when you have, a 12-year-old, both operating system and application, if you haven't migrated. There is a way to do this migration to get to Exchange 2013. What it means, you got to kind of do a leapfrog. In other words, you have to go from 2003 to 2010 and then to 2013. Now, you might be saying, wow, that looks terrible. This process can actually be minimized so that you're kind of using 2010 as more of a, almost think of it as a pass-through gateway where you're going through 2010 and then immediately going to 2013. So it's like an extra step in the process. Yes, it is more complicated because you have to have the 2010 environment and the 2013 environment all set up and running, but it is doable. It's a little bit more than what we're going to do in here, but not much more. It is a very doable situation, and that's the best recommendation. Is don't try to shortcut that. You'd be best off going from 2003 to 2010 because there's issues getting rid of 2003 that are going to be different than like 2007 or 2010, and then migrating 2010 to 2013. Well, okay, tell you what. Let's take a look at what this upgrade is going to look like and how to pull this thing off. Okay, so settle in for a few minutes as we talk about the how to perform this upgrade and what the concept of this is. Now you might be kind of wondering, why did I wait till now? Why did I wait till pretty much the end of the entire course to show you how to do an upgrade? You might be saying, well, I actually need to do this like now. The reason is this: you needed all of that information that we've gone through in this entire course to be able to do this successfully, and also in the Greg Shields course on Exchange. You've needed all of that knowledge to be able to pull this off. And here's what that means is what I'm going to do is it looks like what I'm giving you here is a concept, and it's more than a concept. There's a whole lot of detail going on underneath that you've seen throughout this course that you've already experienced. Now, in this picture I'm not going to drill down to that detail, but I'll get you to that detail here towards the end when we set up a plan on how to execute this. So right now, I want you to focus on the concept here that we're working with. Now, oh boy, here we go. We're going to start off with the infrastructure. Now, look, here's a ground rule that we also have to just kind of start with. Everybody's environment is different. No, this is not my way of playing CYA. What it is saying, hey, look, your environment's going to be different, so there's a lot of information gathering that's going to have to go on for this. And because your environment may be different, the in-depth details might need to be slightly altered because of your environment. So let me draw a fairly generic picture, but it gives you enough detail to see what's happening here. And so we'll start off with the infrastructure. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a cloud. Here's the internet that we get email from, and yeah, I know, I'll stop that. Now, you know, on the internet, you've got, and we've gone through all of this, you've got DNS, you probably have a record out there. Let's just call it right now mail as an A record, and we'll give it an outside IP address for whatever your domain is. And I think, you know, I've been using company.pri or whatever, but, or it could be company.com. But I'm going to do 208.48.139. .2. This will be for like OWA and Outlook Web Access, and or I just said that OWA, Outlook Web Access, and for Outlook Anywhere. There we go. So this IP address, this is your A record, and it's you know, think about this in your infrastructure. This is actually going to a NAT device probably in your environment, and this NAT device is translating this to an internal IP address. And the internal IP address might be something as simple as 192.168. That's not a very good 8. .3.2. The number's not important. It's the concept here that is. And that internal address, now look, we're not looking at the edge role. So if you have 2007 or 2010, you have the edge role. You can put the edge role in place here. I'm just kind of doing the overall concept that this is pointing to your CAS box. Now, does it really matter what version you have? Is this 2007 or 2010? Not really at this point, okay? It really doesn't. So we'll just pretend that this is all 2010. So I'll just say 2010. So this points to your CAS box, and this is how you're getting your folks in through, like I said, OWA and Outlook Anywhere, and you know, your mobile devices, all that kind of stuff. You also have an MX record up here that will be pointing inwards for your, through the NAT, again, the same thing, that'll be coming back to your hub transports to get your mail. Now, you probably have this MX record, as we talked about during this course, you'll probably have it pointing to your anti-spam, antivirus device, and then coming into your transports. However that structure that you have, you definitely want to document that. But in general, you've got a mail and an MX record that's coming in. And you have the roles out there. You got your CAS role. You're going to have your mailbox role. And so MBX, and you're going to have your you're going to have a hub transport. Now your hub transport might be a separate box. It might be, I'm just going to put an H here. It might be on the same box as your MBX. Also, I want you to notice what I'm not drawing in this old environment that you probably have. You probably have high availability, right? So you've got, if it's 2010, you probably have a DAG out there. You've probably got load balance to your CAS boxes. Now, while I'm just drawing one for this, and you know, when you sit down to draw it out, you want to draw all of those components so you have a complete picture or understanding of it. For our concept, that's pretty good for our old environment. Mail flows in, and I'm going to try to keep this picture pretty clean and nice looking. Yeah, that'll be a change, right? I haven't managed to do that the entire series. So as you know, mail flows in and mail flows out, and everything's been pretty good. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to do an upgrade, and what that's going to start with, yeah, is we're going to need Exchange 2013. So you remember from the you know, previous videos, you know, installing Exchange, not a big deal. We're going to put the first Exchange server in, and you'll remember that when you put this first Exchange server in for 2013, just like we talked about, you'll need to prepare Active Directory, you know, and you'll do a prepare AD, prepare all the legacy permissions. If you've separated it where you're running prepare the schema and preparing the domain separately, however you've separated that you're going to do that, as we discussed in an earlier video, then you do that and you install the roles that you have planned and designed to install that we've talked about throughout this series. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a separate CAS and mailbox role for Exchange 2013. So I'm going to put my CAS box in. I'm going to put my mailbox role in. Remember, your transporter is now built in. You know, if you have unified messaging, that's built in, all of that stuff. Here's what you get when you've run prepare AD and you put in your Exchange server. All of the stuff that you have configured over here, well, let's say most of it, all of it, and I'll get you details on this. So all the configs that are over here, still apply to the new Exchange 2013 environment. And here's the new 2013 environment. And so things like your transporter rules, they still all apply. Your journaling rules, your policies that you've created, your retention tags, all of the stuff that we've talked about, your active sync policies, they all still work for the new environment. So this is great. There's what you get when you install this first Exchange 2013 server is you get, and I like to draw it this way, you get mail flow between these environments and you get a cohesive environment. In other words, it's well aware of each other, the older version and the new version. This is the way it's been since we've upgraded from Exchange 2003. This upgrade / migration process is really well done. I mean, it really, really is. So you get all of these benefits. Now, here's what I like to do. Now, notice I've got a single CAS and a single mailbox role. We've got a 2013 environment, and I haven't moved over any mailboxes yet. I've made no changes to my production environment, and that's a key here. So my production environment should be totally unaffected at this point. Mail's still flowing, everybody's got their mailboxes, life is all good, and I'm not going to touch the production environment yet. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to build out this new 2013 environment completely. In other words, whatever I wanted to do, like load balancing for my CAS, and DAGs. So I've got mailboxes out here, MBX. I'm just going to put an M in there. And I'm going to draw this little green thing. You might remember what I was drawing all the time when we do DAGs. So I get all my databases. I start configuring databases, the ones that I know I'm going to need. And I set them up in a DAG. I get all my high availability configured for my new environment. Now, this could be all virtualized or it could be on physical gear. But I'm going to get this all configured. And here's the key. Tested. You know that just as well as I do. I'm going to test this. I'm going to test the high availability environment inside and out. I am going to make sure that these puppies are working just the way they're supposed to work. And so I want to test all those services. Now, there are some additional configuration things that you will need to do, and I will give you that list. However, I want you to think about this. Remember when we were setting up CAS in here, and we were taking a look at CAS, both with high availability and just regular CAS stuff, there's some configuration things that you had to do with the CAS, like for the virtual directories in that. You had to give them their external URLs. And this is a very important part to the process. So I don't want to just kind of say, you know, you just install Exchange and now you're done and it's easy. There is additional configuration that we've already discussed, and I'll give you a list that reminds you of what those things are that you need to do. Once you configure those, you got your high availability set up, you're ready to go on to bigger level testing. And here's what I prefer to do is at this point, I kind of like to put a hold on everything. And here's what I mean by put a hold on everything. I want to find a maintenance window, and I want to flip over mail flow to go through the new environment. In other words, I want to try something, and I don't know if it works yet, so I'm going to put a question mark here. I want to try to get the mail, instead of flowing like I did with this light blue over here, into my old environment, I want to see if I can get the mail to flow through my new environment. And now here's what should happen. Mail going to older mailboxes should flow through the new environment, cross through here, and go to the old mailboxes. Easy peasy. Easy peasy peasy. That's what should happen. Mail going out should go out. In other words, I need some configuration settings for this, but you know that you have to do with the transporter. But mail going out should now go out through my new environment. Some of the other things that I want to test, besides mail flow, is I want to test whether the CAS boxes are working. Now here's what's going to happen with your clients, your email client software out there. Remember, we've got AutoDiscover and all this kind of stuff. The CAS boxes will contact Active Directory and find out where your mailbox is and redirect to your mailbox. So I want you to think about this. If you're using OWA, or you're using Outlook Anywhere, or you're using your mobile device, when you connect in here to this CAS box, the new one, is smart enough to be aware of the old environment. So you know what he's going to do? Proxy redirection, and he's going to get you to your mailbox, even if it's in the old environment. So the idea is this. You want to see if the new environment works as it's supposed to. And if it doesn't, you want to be able to quickly flip it back so that you can go back to production. So what I look for is a maintenance window to do this. Now, I just want to point something out. A lot of folks like to try this during a maintenance window, but here's their challenge. You'll see this a lot in a lot of instructions. They'll say, well, you know, you're going to need to change your DNS record. I'm not a big fan of flipping the DNS record, and here's why. It takes a long time for that process to occur. I know that there are as far as testing goes, you know, you can get it to happen on your local DNS, or excuse me, your outside DNS that's nearest to you sooner, and so that you can flip it over for testing and then flip it back. But I don't like the ramifications of still possibly having to wait 24 hours for a DNS rollover. So here's what I like to do. Remember, your environment has this NAT device in here that's already doing the translation. It's already doing a translation to the internal addresses for all these guys, like whatever they are, the different 192 addresses, whatever you have for internal. That's supposed to be a 9. What I like to do is flip it here at the NAT. Yeah, flip it here at the NAT. That way it's instantaneous and you have complete and immediate control. Now, this may mean that you need whoever is responsible for configuring that NAT around to do it, but it means you can flip this over, test everything, see if it's working. If you have any issues whatsoever, flip it back to the old way. Oh, isn't that cool? And that way you're not harming your production environment. And since you're doing it during a maintenance window, yippee, nobody gets upset. So that's excellent. Now, if I've done a really good job and I've already, I've sorted out all the technical issues, if I make this flip and everything is working, and you have to test everything, and here's what we mean by test everything. What I mean by test everything. Test using mailboxes that are in the old environment, test some mailboxes that are in the new environment, test all of your client type of connectivity, because you have to make sure your firewall rules are set up and all that kind of stuff. Test all client types that you have for your environment. If Mailflow and all your client types are working, I like to leave this now set up with this, and that means this old Mailflow has been discarded. And I do all this before I've migrated a single mailbox or public folder over to the new environment. That way everything is working and up and running. Well, as you can imagine in this concept, the next piece of this is, well, okay, I've got my new environment up and everything's rock and roll and I'm ready to start moving stuff. How do I move stuff? Well, let's take a second here and I'll show you the stuff that we're going to move. Now here's where I might sound a little flippant, but what's left at this point, move stuff. Move the mailboxes and move the public folders. That's all you got to do, right? Actually, it's not that bad. Well, let me put it this way. Moving the mailboxes is not that bad. Public folders now, because of the new architecture, can be a little bit challenging, but I got everything that you need already lined up to help you with that. So it's not a bad process. And earlier in this series, we looked at what you can do with mailboxes, moving them from one database to another. And by the way, moving mailboxes to a new database happens to be a great way to defrag the old one. But that's all you're doing here. You're just doing a mailbox move. Now I like to do this with PowerShell, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these mailboxes. You can do it with the graphical if you want and say move, and you get to choose the new database that you want it to move to. So there's a database over here, boink, that I want it to move to. It's a move request, and so that move request will occur. You can monitor it. When the mailboxes get moved, yippee, we are groovy. Now here's something to keep in mind. Remember how this system works. When users connect to the CASBox, the first thing, since all clients connect there, first thing we're going to do is contact Active Directory to find out. Remember, here's a little AD box over here, a domain controller. Find out, what your GUID is and where your mailbox is located. Well, that's why this move request is such a beautiful thing, because when you move stuff over, as soon as they connect to the CASBox, we're just going to find out where the new mailbox is. So this is great, and you can schedule this to run. Now, of course, this is an upgrade or a migration process, so you're going to want to start off small, right? You're going to want to pick users that would be easy to repair if something went wrong, a small quantity of them, move them, test them, make sure everything's working. Pick the boss. No, don't pick the boss the first time out. Then you're going to want to move some more. As you're comfortable that everything is working as expected, and that all of their client software is still connecting and everything is testing out as expected, then you can start moving larger and larger quantities. Now, this is where you're in your coexistence period. Coexistence. There's no way I'm going to spell this correct, so I'm just going to put coexist. This is when you're in your coexistence period. And you can stay this way for as long as you would like. Now, my idea behind a migration is let's get this puppy migrated. So I'd like to have a consistent move forward of migration. But think about this. You can schedule these mailbox moves to occur for different groups of users at different times when they are least likely to be affected by the move process. And this works out very, very well. And so as you're in this coexistence, you do your mailbox moves, and eventually you will have them all completed. Now there's a couple of system mailboxes that have to get moved as well that I'll show you when I show you the whole list, so that that way you will never forget when you get the whole list. So there is more details here, but it's really not that bad, nothing more than a mailbox move. Here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Public folders. Now look, I know we all have different feelings about public folders. Some of us love public folders. I love public folders. Some of us not that thrilled with public folders because they've gotten out of control. Regardless, you're probably going to be living with public folders, and you're going to need to migrate your public folders. Now, this is a much more challenging process now than it used to be. It's a much more challenging process simply because we've got this new architecture. And in the long run, the new architecture is much better if you're using public folders, because remember, it uses DAGs. And so we get this great high availability now for our public folders. What this means is you're going to have to go out and make those mailboxes for those public folders. I'm trying to use the same color here. So let's pretend, let's use, some just stupid numbers. Let's pretend that, I have my public folder, my existing public folder in my old environment is 1 terabyte in size. And I'm just using weird numbers so that I can do math a little bit better. So 1 terabyte, well, think about this. If my maximum allowable database size is 200 gig, and remember back to disaster recovery, that the size of your database is dictated by the time it takes you to recover within your SLA. See how all this stuff we've been doing ties together now during a migration? So let's pretend that my maximum size is going to be 200 gig. Well, you can see that I'm going to need more than one of these, right? So I'm going to, I got a terabyte worth of data I got to squeeze in here. So I'm going to need a whole bunch of these, right? 200 gig, 200 gig, 200 gig. Well, I can't squeeze them all on here, but you get the idea. So what I'm going to have to do, and just think of this from a conceptual standpoint, I'm going to have to decide what content is going to get broken up and going to where, and get this stuff migrated. And remember, users are probably going to be trying to change some of this data during the process. So Microsoft has a very detailed process already written out that you can use for migrating the public folders. Now I have to tell you, when you ask guys and gals that have done this, they're like, oh yeah, man, the public folders, it just kind of sucks. It doesn't really. It's a manageable process, but understand that there is more to it than it was in the past. So if you have experience doing this in the past, this is just a little bit different. And it's a detailed process. You'll get prepared for setting this up. You'll create the new folder mailboxes, just as we did. You'll start basically a move or a copy request, a migration request over for it. And then you're going to put a lock on this guy. You're going to lock this down so that nobody can make changes to it, and you'll finalize the public folder migration. Yes, more complicated, but again, I'm going to give you a place with all of the detailed steps so you don't make any mistakes. So we've done mailboxes, and our public folders. What's the last major piece to this concept? Well, it's getting rid of the old environment. So when you've gone through the plan that we're getting up to, what I'm going to show you, and you've completed your migration, now it's time to get rid of the old environment. This is where I want to point something out. Notice how I started out this and I said that my preference before I started moving anything was to get this new mail flow environment set up and switched over. Some people like to do that at the end. That means there's a lot of possibility for a lot of problems all of a sudden. I don't like that. That's why I like to do this up front, or basically first, before I start migrating stuff. Now, look at my situation. Once I'm completely migrated, completely tested, I still get all my policies, I've made the changes I need to make, everything is working, I don't have to mess with the mail flow. I don't have to say that I don't have to mess with the mail flow, which means the only thing I really have to do is go through and remove or decommission that previous or older environment. Now look, removing and decommissioning your environment, there's, again, which I'm going to give you a clear set of steps on how to get rid of this. But here's what I like to do first. I'm going to draw a giant line. Maybe. Let's see if I can draw a giant line between the old environment and the new environment. Yeah, giant line. What I like to do is some people will get a little over anxious and they'll walk up and they'll say, hey, let's just start, ripping servers out of place. No, you want to formally decommission your Exchange servers. Remember, these have entries in Active Directory, and we don't want those entries just hanging out there. So we want to properly remove these. But what I like to do is I want to make sure there's no more hanger honor things. What I like to do is shut these down. Not remove Exchange yet, just turn them off and make sure everything's still working. In other words, make sure nothing is hinging on these guys and the fact that they're running and operating. Just gives me another opportunity to test and check to make sure everything's good. Now, once I've determined that with these guys turned off, my life is still good, then I will formally decommission them. And basically, it's removing Exchange from these boxes. Once Exchange has been removed, it gets everything gets all cleaned up in Active Directory, all that kind of stuff. So Exchange gets removed. Now you can start ripping the servers out, and you can totally, I'm going to make a big change to my picture. You can totally get rid of the old environment. And you are now on Exchange 2013. Now, one side note is, what we've been doing here and what I've been describing is a typical upgrade or migration or transition process to Exchange on premises. So this is an Exchange installation that you're doing on site. And I have a lot of friends that at their companies, this is what they're doing. In a future video, matter of fact, the next one or the next one after that, we're going to talk about some other options like coexistence with, different mail systems other than Exchange. And one of my favorite things is we're going to take a look at Office 365 Exchange Online. You might be wanting to do a migration to Exchange Online. That might involve you doing both Exchange 2013 on premises, or you might want to do a direct cutover to Exchange Online. So I just want to point out that we'll talk about that situation in an upcoming video. This situation is mainly if you want to be on-prem, although the concept will always be the same when we do this kind of migration. It's a nice, safe migration. Remember, keep in mind, I'm not harming my original production environment here. This is, one of my, I hate to say this, but can I just say, I heart upgrades. Yeah, as an Exchange person, I actually enjoy doing this. I know it sounds weird because it's dangerous, right? But I do. I heart upgrades. I love this process. It's been a very good process. And again, I just want to point this out. This isn't a CYA thing. This is just a note to you that everybody's environment is different. So your mileage will slightly vary on how happy you are initially. And so that's why I want to help you with this and give you a great resource to build a plan and get your migration done successfully. So, do you want to be 100% successful at doing your own migration for your company? Well, you can be. Now, what I mean by 100% successful, let's define that real quick. 100% successful means you will succeed. Where's that percent sign go? Is it on the left or is it on the right? I can never get, here, I'll put it on both sides. So 100% successful means you will succeed. That doesn't mean, and you've been in IT a long time, so you know how this works. That doesn't mean that you won't have issues. Oh, wait a minute. Issues come in magazines. We have problems in IT. So it doesn't mean that you won't have problems. It doesn't mean that you won't have to do some troubleshooting. It doesn't mean that you, in your situation, in your environment, may not, you might have to jump out to Google or Bing or whatever, your favorite search engine, and try to solve or resolve an issue that is unique or particular to your environment. So, but what it does mean is that you can be ready to go to do this. Just a few things you want to do. You want to have a plan. And so I want to help you with the plan because I got a great way for you to build a plan. This entails, the first thing that you build is a lab environment. So you need a lab environment. And you know this. You've done other stuff where you needed a lab environment. In this case, you can have it virtualized. You know, why waste all the physical gear? But you know, you can have it virtualized. But here's a couple of keys about your lab environment. Unlike the lab environment that I had described at the very beginning of this course, to use for this video series, unlike that lab environment, which was just clean and vanilla, you want a lab environment that is as close as possible to your existing production environment. So it's got to be as close to your production environment. Okay, so my production environment as possible. And you can really see the importance of this. You need to know what's going to go wrong. And the only way you're going to know what's going to go wrong is to have everything that you possibly can have from that production environment. So you're going to need, obviously, a good map of your environment, a great network diagram, all the IP addresses, all that kind of stuff. But when you build the lab environment, you want to build it as close as humanly possible to that environment. Now, here's one way to do it. You know, it's a great way to test your disaster recovery, right? So you got backups. Well, let's see if you can restore them and make that environment. Now, it is important that this is air-gapped. And maybe that's not a good term to use, but you've got an air gap between your lab environment and your real production environment, and you know that you don't want your stuff plugged into the same network, because you're going to be making changes to Active Directory, you're going to be making changes to Exchange. You don't want to affect your real production environment. So you want this lab environment built up. You know, you might look at it and go, well, you know, I don't really need all of the high availability features built in. Okay, that's fine, but you need to get as much of the configuration, your policies, and all of that stuff, your transport rules, everything that you have from that old environment, you need to get in this lab environment. Now, once you have the lab environment, you're probably going to want to make a copy of that, because you're probably going to try this a few times. That's the other thing I want to point out is do this more than once. Do this more than once. It's not that you're practicing the process, but you are. And it's also giving you an opportunity to go, oh, I forgot this, and let me try this and see if that works. So you want to do this not just for the practice, but for the discovery of maybe something that you missed when you built the lab environment. So you're going to want to try it more than once, and you're going to want you're going to want a very good plan. Well, you know, we've talked about so many things throughout this entire series that you actually need to bring together for this plan. You might be thinking, well, what's a great way to do it? Well, I started out this video by showing you what I like to start to use for a plan. TechNet has some great resources. Now, you're going to want to check for updates, okay? So you're going to want to see, you know, what's the latest and greatest, you know, information out there. But let me just show you. I had searched for upgrading Exchange 2013. Here's the TechNet article. I know that's really tiny to read, but you can look at the very beginning of the video and see it's listed. It's a TechNet article. Oh, wait a minute. This is the wrong article. Well, I tell you what, we're going to just go search again. I think I missed, see, Exchange. Oh, upgrading. Let me type this in. Upgrade. Well, boy. Upgrade Exchange 2013. And so right here, this is the one I'm grabbing, but make sure you check for updates, that kind of thing. And so upgrade from Exchange, in this case 2010 to Exchange 2013, and I'm going to go down through this list. And looking, a lot of the stuff that's in here, first of all, it starts off and it explains to you, you know, all of the versions that you can upgrade and what's going to happen. And any important notes, like you'll see a note right up here towards the top, and I'm not sure exactly where it is, that will remind you that once you put in 2013, you can't put in any additional older servers. You can only do 2013. It'll tell you what updates to be at, all of that kind of stuff. Again, it'll discuss the things that we discussed, you know, the coexistence and the general upgrade process as a task list. You should review this task list. This is building your project plan for you to help you do this. And there are details. You know, here's moving the mailboxes from Exchange. Well, you need to know details about that. Click the link, and it takes you into the details. So it's a real fast way for you to really get the details that you need for setting all this up. And of course, they'll go through, you know, all of the issues, things that we talked about during this, you know, earlier in this series, everything that you need. Now, what I really, really, really like, and I mentioned this earlier, is up here at the top, I like to go through all of that, but I like to also the checklist. This is something that I also like to print out and then have access to all of the details. I know that I was kind of making a little bit of fun about this, but I check these things off. Read the release notes. Yep, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to look at the release notes, go through the system requirements again, confirm your prerequisites are done. So there's the prereqs. We talked about namespaces. So, how are you handling your namespaces? Make sure you have this kind of planning out. All of the planning that we discussed in here, this takes you through what you need for your migration. So you make sure you have your offline address book and set up, and then installing Exchange. And here's all of the resources you need to install Exchange. The new, 2013. Create some mailboxes on the new 2013. Remember when I was telling you about the CAS and having to modify, the virtual directories? We talked about it earlier in the videos. Well, right here it is. Make sure that your virtual directories are set up correct. And here's the link to remind you of what that needs to be. Certificates. Going to need certificates. So make sure you got your certificates. Here's one of those. Here's the arbitration mailbox, one of the system mailboxes that we have to make sure gets moved over. And here's information and instructions on exactly how to do it. So they'll give you both PowerShell and through the Exchange Management Console and graphical instructions. And then you'll see, well, if you have unified messaging, if you're using an Edge transport server, verifying that Outlook Anywhere is configured, enabled. And in Exchange 2013, we talked about this earlier, it is enabled by default, but just to make sure, your service connection points, your DNS records, and then, oh looky, here's moving the mailboxes. See, this is just what we did when we were drawing it into pictures. So here's how to move mailboxes, and then, dun, dun, dun. Remember I was telling you, you really wanted the detailed list of migrating or moving public folder data? Well, you can get all of that information on how to move it and get it all set up. And then the post-installation tasks, which, making sure everything's secured, making sure, your network's working, all that kind of stuff. So between all of the conceptual stuff that we spent times drawing the picture on and this wonderful list, if you follow it in detail and you practice it first in a lab environment, you can be successful at doing this yourself. You don't have to bring in a consultant. I'm not believe me, I'm a consultant, so I'm not knocking consultants. I'm just simply saying you have the ability, after going through this series, of being able to do this migration and this upgrade all yourself. Well, pretty cool. Let's take a look at what we talked about during this video. So I mentioned I heart upgrades, right? See, I'm actually really excited. I want to go do another one. Oh boy. So here's what we did is we took a look at the process of upgrading / migrating / transitioning, whatever you want to call it as far as the terms go. Exchange your previous versions to Exchange 2013 on premises. Gave you some resources for that, and these resources, like I said, check for updates. This is what helps you build your plan along with creating a lab environment, a really good lab environment. The better you make that lab environment close to your production one, the happier you're going to be, because the better it's going to work in real life. So we got you those resources, and then we looked at the process, and really the process and the concepts of how to perform an upgrade. We didn't dive into all the individual details because the individual details are in that plan that I gave you, so you won't forget all those things, because it is a lot of stuff, right? It's a lot of stuff that we've done in this series so far, and it's a lot of stuff when you're actually doing a migration. But we went through the concepts of how to get the new environment in, testing everything, then making the move of the mailboxes and the public folders, and then decommissioning out the old environment. So it's one of those things that, yes, it's fascinating and it's interesting. I cannot recommend it any more than to go out and try an upgrade or a migration. You'll actually kind of enjoy it. Again, just keep in mind, your environment may have some unique issues. So again, that's why this lab environment is so important, so make sure you identify and resolve those unique issues. But you can be very successful at pulling this off. So you know what, I just love this kind of stuff. So I hope this video has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.